Rohitji, the first issue that we will discuss is the current status of Defence Research Development Organization. As we all know, it is a network of 50 labs and that is directly linked to Defence Research and Development Department in the Ministry of Defence. It was established in 1958 and has 50 plus laboratories spread all over India undertaking critical research in niche fields. Let's give an example. For example, CVRDE, that is Combat Vehicle Research Development Establishment, that manufactures Arjun tanks, or HAL, which is the producing element for light combat aircraft, whereas the design and development element is going to be ADA, that is Aeronautical Defense Agency. It is also linked with a large number of industries. Rohitji, can you tell us some of the achievements of DRDO?
So DRDO has been fairly successful. Look at LCA, it has come to a certain level from where we were before LCA, where we have achieved. Second is, right now we already have a main battle tank, Arjun, in our country. The spin-off of Arjun should be looked at as a light tank. We have been able to come out in a very short period of time. Then there are varieties of missile systems, especially the strategic missile system. We have been able to achieve almost all the objectives of a strategic missile system. Even in tactical missile system, Nag, Astra, and then now Pralay, Prahar, and so on and so forth are emerging. Pinaka, we shouldn't forget, it's a great success. Pinaka has been. ATAC is now emerging very quickly. So if we look at overall, and then yes, let's not forget nuclear submarine, and also in the nuclear weapon system, that the achievements which we definitely cannot talk in the public domain for various well-known reasons. So I think DRDO has achieved a lot. We should also mention about radars, electronic warfare systems, and associated technologies
like Akash.
Yes, Akash is a
surface to air missile system. Okay, Rohitji, whilst DRDO has a number of achievements and we all are very, very proud of them, at the same time, there have been concerns expressed. In a recent CAG report, it said that 2/3 of the 175 projects of DRDO have had time delays. Anywhere from 16% to 500%, which means that if a project was to be developed in 5 years, it took them 25 years to develop it. Secondly, the systems and equipment that were being developed were left off and are now being renamed and started as new projects. Let me give you an example of Arjun main battle tank. It was started, the project was first finalized in 1972. It took 3 decades for the Mark 1 to come out, and that too, it had significant problems of operating in high temperatures, maneuverability and transportation because of its extremely high weight, more than 68 tons. Then came the Mark 1A, and the government had to coerce the Indian Army to buy 62 Mark 1 MBTs and 118 Mark 1A, which meant a total of 180, yet we had to go to Russia to buy T-90 MS 474 tanks in 2019. Why do you think there is a delay? Because we are going to discuss the LCA next, but for the Arjun MBT itself, that why it has not been able to prove itself, why we have to still go and buy the Russian equipment.
I'll give you an example. There is a very famous sitcom, The Big Bang Theory, in which there is these scientists, these 4 guys, scientists, those who are familiar with the sitcom would know, they discuss. They do a project with the US Air Force, and there they find that they say it will delay. So tell me one contractor which has not delayed. Delays in defense is a very common thing. If we look at all the weapon development programs of all the developed countries, you will find that there are delays. And there are delays in almost everything. Whether, I should name very famous automobile company which said that it would come up with a off-roader, they got delayed by many years. Now, which is our open technology, which is something that they have been manufacturing for almost 70-80 years. yet there are delays. Now we are talking about Arjun tank. Let's say example for Arjun tank. When an SQR is made, the SQR is based on the operational requirement or perceived operational requirement or available technologies. The fundamental problem happens is based on the available technologies, existing technology which has to be created in the country. You are at least 10 to 15 years behind. So by the time that technology is acquired and achieved in 15 years time, thereafter your product is already 1 generation to 2 generation behind. So the user demands technologies and capabilities which are up to mark, up to date. That means you are still going back to 15 years board. So this is the reason why things delay. This is in a very ideal situation when you already have the capability, you already have a production system, you already have a well-developed research institution. But in the case of DRDO, that's not the case. They were supposed to create an ecosystem through which they can develop a product. Now the timeline that people perceive is the problem. You cannot have a product development without a timeline, the bureaucratic requirement. When you have to develop an ecosystem, you do not know where and all there will be fallouts. And developing a system requires you to, and you have a workforce which does know nothing about a product. So they have to learn about the product, they have to learn about the technologies, and then they have to create it. And then also they have to create the ecosystem to manufacture and develop.
Rohitji, a very important thing you have brought out, that by the time the defense research technologies are being developed in India, they are already becoming outdated because new systems and technologies are taking their place world over. We'll be coming to this with another example of light combat aircraft whose project was approved in 1983, 1984. ADA was set up for design and development, and it took them 17 years thereafter to have the first prototype to fly in Jan 2001. Like you rightly said, Jan 2001. And after that, it took them 15 years for the production of first few aircraft that were handed over to the Air Force in July 2016. But since then also it is more than 8 years and they have not been able to give 40 aircraft also Mark 1, which is 3.5 generation aircraft, which has some components which are 4th generation. So if we cannot supply in 40 years a basic version of aircraft, and it is already outdated because 5th generation and 6th generation systems are flying, then how do we develop an ecosystem where we can catch up on technologies?
Well, you gave a very example of LCA. See, LCA is a very complicated system to start off with. It requires so many subsystems which are themselves are one of the cutting edge, which requires a lot of subsystems within themselves. And each of the product, each of the subsystem or component of the subsystems requires an industry, well-matured industry to manufacture them. Now, DRDO cannot create the ecosystem. It was supposed to create a product. Now, did we have the right kind of basic science available? Did we have the right kind of information available? Did we have the right kind of tools available? Were we manufacturing something of the same of that complexity in orders? Did we have the right kind of manpower to do everything at every level? This is not just an LCA. This is a problem that you will always have even in future going forward if we try new technologies. Look at the example of Arjun tank, LCA, FICV, or India's own 6 diesel submarine. Where do we stand? Any system where we have to create a very complicated systems of system, there we will have a problem because it requires a capability at every level which we do not have. DRDO alone cannot create an ecosystem. Then there is a silo mentality. DRDO also uses private sector, but those private sector are what we call as a startup. That's what startup were in 2000 and all, which were making component for LCAs. Those small companies do not have the bandwidth unless we had gone for mass production of the very basic fighters. That is when the ecosystem would have been energized. These small companies which make a component for a technology demonstrator would have an order of say 20 aircrafts, then there will be a supply chain will develop. That supply chain will have an interest in investing into that. How many companies would have made few components and thereafter would have got no orders? What would have happened to those capabilities, those equipment that those were purchased for that? Nobody is doing the calculation of that. So some people must have got been trained. What happened to those trained people? So what we should have done, now we cannot recreate it because the technology has gone forward. What we should have done is we should have gone for small numbers, batches, and then we should have continued with the production, and as on when we would develop a new technology or improved upon, we would have integrated within the aircraft. That would have been helpful in keeping the ecosystem working, because a lot of workforce would have added. People who had worked at the lower level would have gone and become senior managers. So that way the institutional knowledge, the institutional capability would have been developed across the ecosystem, but that did not happen. Look at example of Pakistan. Its fighter is not great, everybody knows.
JF-17.
But it has already in third trench.
Absolutely, block 3.
Block 3. How did it happen? And every trench is better. And this is how it happens. Of course, we also know the developed countries, they improve in 10-15 years. They do a massive overall.
Because they have a technological base.
But we do not have. We should have gone by 40 trench. Every 40 we could have added new thing. Of course, it would have increased the price enormously of the project cost.
No, but I think what you are saying has two different aspects to it, sir. The first aspect that you are saying is that while we encourage the ecosystem to build up and while we develop the aircraft in stages or the equipment in stages like the Arjun main battle tank, which resulted in light tank coming in, which is now Zorawar, which is going to be used at high altitudes. So whilst we are doing this in small packages to remain relevant within the subcontinent as well as globally, we can also purchase off the shelf the latest technology and use it in transfer of technology and use those technologies also to build up our ecosystem. So it's a combination. We should not look at only developing ourselves. We could look at co-developing, such as with the Sukhoi 57.
See, long-term perspective is missing. It's the project-based perspective. So everybody is looking at each project separately. It's a very bureaucratic approach. Now, if we go for 40 trench, if we add, say, let's say one upgrade of the software, just avionics, one upgrade, nothing else is improved. But that can be improved into the already flying aircraft. Next trench, say there is an improvement in, say, hydraulics. Let's assume, or that can be integrated. Now, cost of the project will skyrocket. But the greatest benefit would be the absorption of the technology across the ecosystem, which will help subsequently in developing a new fighter and will make the next project very efficient.
For example, the LCA Mark II, or for example, even AMCA. The technologies would go to AMCA. But here, sir, I have a one point with you.
Just one line.
Ji.
Even today, if we go for the AMCA, the situation is still the same.
I want to discuss the AMCA separately with you, but I want to discuss something here. We have a two-front threat. One side is China and the other side is Pakistan. You remember the Chanakya's Mandal theory, where he said that the powerful neighbors will always be hostile to you and they'll be competitive.
Of course.
And neighbor's neighbor would be a friend, like we are trying to develop with ASEAN countries who are neighbors of China. And like China and Pakistan, close relationship exists today. That is why their JF-17 fighter could be developed. So when this two-front threat exists, whilst we can co-develop or we can develop our aircraft in incremental stages, the technology coming up, we still have to look at short term to fill in the gaps. For example, today the Indian Air Force has reduced to 30 squadrons. In this year it will become 29 squadrons. If we do not do anything by 2035, if we just wait for Mark 1A LCA, will be reduced to between 20 to 22 fighter squadrons. Now, we won't even be relevant with Pakistan, which has now bought J-35 off the shelf, which is a 5th generation fighter aircraft from China. So I think a true pronged strategy is very necessary. Incremental development of your technology co-development of high technology systems, as well as buying off the shelf to fill the short-term gaps with transfer of technology clause into it. Rohitji, thank you very much for sparing your valuable time, explaining to us nitty-gritties of where the current status of defense technology is and how to take it forward and how to reduce the critical gap that exists between the advanced nations and us. I'm also thankful to the listeners who may have tuned in and spared their time to understand this extremely important but a very complicated issue. May I request the listeners that to please suggest us some more topics and write in your comments what do you feel about this podcast and where we can improve. Thank you and Jai Hind.